During the first 10 years of the 20th century, the art of cartooning reached a new phase with the development of animation. And one of the most important developers was the great pioneer Max Fleischer. Fleischer's experiments led to the first realistic animation as early as 1915 with his invention of the rotoscope. His brother Dave was filmed in a clown costume, and the footage was painstakingly traced, frame by frame. In 1925, Fleischer produced the first animation with sound and introduced the world to the famous bouncing ball, which was an early version of karaoke and the music video. In the 1930s, Max Fleischer was a leading animation pioneer for Paramount, with the first female cartoon star, Betty Boop, who embraced the jazz age with her guest stars, Louis Armstrong, Don Redman, and Cab Calloway. Fleischer's realization of Popeye the Sailor made him a box office champion who was more popular than Mickey Mouse. In the 1940s, Max Fleischer's Superman took animation to new heights with its breathtaking action and pulp fiction imagery, which continue to amaze and inspire audiences today. But Max Fleischer was much more than a cartoon producer. He was an artist, a writer, and an inventor with over 20 patents for animation and motion picture processes. Max Fleischer was truly a 20th century Renaissance man. Now, many are rediscovering the magic and delight of the Max Fleischer film legacy. Unfortunately, this legacy is in danger of disappearing, since many of these important films are 100 years old, with others approaching that point. Some are already considered lost forever. Our mission is to round up what survives and restore the Fleischer film legacy in modern digital form, so that the public will continue to enjoy the works of Max Fleischer, but most of all, so that current and future animators will be inspired and learn from these masterful works that all began with a pen and an inkwell.
Oh yeah, definitely. Hello, everybody. My name is Bill Leff. I'm the host of Tune In With Me, Monday through Friday on MeTV. I'm going to ask a question that I already know. Oh, thank you very much for those thunderous applause. I'm going to ask you all a question that I already know the answer to because I studied for the show, and that is, are there any animation fans here by any chance? Anybody enjoy cartoons? I had a feeling. I definitely had a feeling. All right, so over on our show on Tune In With Me, we are very fortunate because we show you the best of the best. We show you classic cartoons like this. We show you Chuck Jones and we show you Tex Avery. And a guy named Max Fleischer, who when I was a kid, if a Max Fleischer cartoon came on, that was it. I was going to be late for school. I was going to watch that cartoon, no question about it. So what today is a discussion of the past and the present and the future of Max Fleischer. That's why we call it Celebrating Max Fleischer. So what I'm going to ask from you is not only enjoy yourselves while we talk about Max Fleischer and about the animation industry, but think up some questions in your head because I know you have them, so don't be afraid. Toward the end, we'll do a Q&A with everybody, and you'll get a chance to ask this esteemed panel of people what you want to know about animation and Max Fleischer. Let me introduce you to some of the people on the panel. Now, normally they say when you do the introductions, hold your applause till the end, but I know some of these people, and if you don't applaud, they'll leave. So please... I'm going to start out with Steve Stanchfield. Steve is, listen to this resume. He has worked as an animation director and an animator for Media Station, for Disney, for Warner Brothers, for Hasbro, for Mattel, and many others. He also runs Thunderbeam Animation. So please, like I said, applaud a lot for Steve Stanchfield. He's right over there on the end. Thad Kamarowski, a lifelong student and researcher of the classic animated cartoon and operates his own film restoration company. It's called Cine East Restoration. He's the author of Sick Little Monkeys, the unauthorized Ren and Stimpy story. He's the co-author of the forthcoming History of New York City studio animation. And again, his name is Thad Kamarowski. He's right over there. Next up is Brandon Adams. Brandon is an exploration expert, but that's not all he does. He's also a clinical neuropsychologist, ladies and gentlemen. By training, he became interested in learning about digital animation and the golden age of animation, currently working for Max Fleischer Cartoons, LLC, helping the Fleischer family restore their vast library of animation. And his name is Brandon Adams. He's right over there. Next up is Roy Pointer. Roy's great. A storyboard artist, an animator. Yes, Roy. Ray. I'm sorry. Ray, did I do that in San Diego also? Maybe I'm saying it right. You might be saying it wrong. Is that possible?
You got the last name wrong.
Ray Pointer is his name. Whether you know it or not, he's a great guy, a storyboard artist, an animation expert, a director for Film Roman, for DIC, for Hanna-Barbera, for Disney Interactive, for MGM, for Nickelodeon. Oh, our time is up. He's also has been inducted into the Television Academy of Arts and Sciences. That is Ray Pointer, everybody. Ask for him by name. The gentleman to my left is incredible, Mauricio Alvarado, owner of the pop culture merchandise company rockinpins.com. He's passionate about vintage animation and collecting of Fleischer cartoons and the restoration project we will tell you a lot more about throughout the day. That's Mauricio Alvarado, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
And last, and believe me when I say this, not the least in any way, shape, or form, Jane Fleischer, everybody. Jane is Max Fleischer's granddaughter. Her father, motion picture director Richard Fleischer, wrote a biography about his father, that's Max Fleischer, called Out of the Inkwell, Max Fleischer and the Animation Revolution. One more round of applause for Jane, if you could. Jane, in a word, wow. Steve said something to me right before we started. He said, this is a magical time, and it is a magical time because we look back on the genius of your grandfather, and he's being celebrated today. A whole new generation is seeing his cartoons, sometimes for the very first time, and like myself and like I'm guessing almost everybody here, they are awestruck by what they see. What's behind that magic?
You know, I wish I knew. Hello? Can anybody hear me? Hello? Hello? Hello?
That's better.
Hey,
yeah.
okay. I wish I knew what was behind the magic. He was an amazing guy, and he was just really talented.
He was, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, some people just have it.
He always had it. He always drew. Ever since he was a little kid, he liked drawing, and then he discovered, and you've got to remember, this is in the 1880s, he discovered that he loved drawing machines. And he was really fascinated with how did machines work. And so the two of those kind of came together to give him this kind of insight into how do things work, and then he'd anthropomorphize them so they grew personalities. And I think that was kind of the basis of what got him his style of animation.
Ray, I go to you. As Jane pointed out, even as a young man, even as a child, he knew that animation was in his future. Was there that much animation going on when he was a child?
No.
No.
It hadn't even come along until the early 1900s because we have to wait until the development of the motion picture, and that didn't come and start until 1898.
Yeah.
But within that period of 5 or 6 years, all of a sudden things started to advance very quickly.
Yeah.
So it was just a matter of time. And there's some argument about exactly when animated cartoons started because a lot of things develop in parallel
Yeah.
in different parts of the world. But if we focus on the developments in the United States, a lot of that is focused on what Winsor McCay did, but at the same time over in France we have Émile Cole who preceded him. But the basic thing is that because McCay was just such an advanced artist, it was obvious that this had great entertainment value. But to do animation requires a great deal of skill and understanding, and in those days nobody knew how to do it. So to make the long story short, it wasn't until Max came along that anybody was able to at least come up with more realistic looking animation of the level of what McCay was doing. Previous to that, there weren't enough trained artists who had enough knowledge and drawing skill.
Right, right. Steve, let's go to you on this one. His experimental qualities are unbelievable. I mean, this was such an early time, as we've pointed out, in animation. What was it about him that just made him so experimental and so good at it so early?
You know, I think if you just think about animation, it's really half mechanical,
half creative and always was. And the odd thing, it's the early Fleischer cartoons are sort of similar to the early Felix the Cats in that you've seen a handful of them. It's there's some of us that are nutty enough to sit around YouTube and try to find every last thing that's there. But the Fleischer material, the early Fleischer material, is so hard to see. Ray Pointer was the first person to really put out a bigger compilation set of some of these early films. And when you look at the early Fleischer cartoons, almost any period of the Fleischer, you just see the kind of this amazing creativity that happens, and sort of a scruffy, sort of a scruffy blue collar mentality. Even in the early Out of the Inkwell cartoons, where Max is always combative with a very mischievous Coco. And so that's part of what's really magical about them, is that there's personality. And he thought about cartoon characters having personality. You know, McKay had come up with Gertie the Dinosaur, which is kind of the first animated character for, you know, there was actually created for animation.
Yeah.
And what Max did with the clown, even before he was named, was to develop a character that started to sort of live on his own, kind of beyond the drawing even, you know. There's that famous story of Chuck Jones saying, you know, meeting a friend and the friend said to his daughter, "Oh, this is the man who makes Bugs Bunny." And the daughter got angry and said, "No, he just draws Bugs Bunny." So these things sort of live on their own, you know. And I think that Max and Dave got there really early, you know, and continued. All of the Fleischer cartoons have this wonderful personality and craziness.
When you're a trailblazer, Jane, there's no one to emulate. When an industry is so new, you can't rest on the heels of who's come before you. How did he pull this off? How was he able to just be so inventive and so original? What was going on in his chemical makeup that have allowed him to do that?
Another difficult question.
Yeah, I'm saving all the tough ones for you. I hope that's okay.
Thanks. Oh, I have to talk into the mic. How did he get so inventive? I think he was just driven by passion. Like I said, he just, well, also he's trying to make a living in this budding industry that, you know, really had no rules and no guidelines with how to do things. The story that I heard was he went to the movies and saw a cartoon one night, and some bigwig in the budding moving industry said to him, "Max, you're a smart young guy. Can't you make these cartoons look any better? They're kind of all jerky." And, you know, he kind of shrugged and thought about it and went home and invented the rotoscope.
Wow. Wow.
It wasn't quite that easy. But
There is kind of a drudgery to early animation because, I mean, it was a product, and it needed, and Bray demanded that stuff be churned out, and certainly there's great artists. But Thad, what do you think of some of this early stuff?
I plead the fifth.
I mean, there's good material throughout. Brandon, what do you think? Like really early silent animation outside of the Fleischers?
Well, Felix is great, of course. But,
I like it. I like the jerkiness of it. I like the crudeness of it. The thing I like about animation, especially the way it was done back in the day, is that the process of making the animation kind of captures how it was made. For a lot of the Out of the Inkwells, they use what's called the slash and tear technique.
Slash and tear.
So it's paper, and on these films that we're helping clean up, you can see the layers of the paper kind of go over, and then when there's animation, you just see the paper moving and jerking around, and that's something that I don't know, for whatever reason, I just like it.
I love that technique shows.
Yeah.
You know?
that's how beautiful the material is that we're working with, fortunately.
And it reminds you that it's a drawing, and it's ink on paper. And if I can digress a little bit, one of the Fleischer heirs had the idea about revising Coco the Clown in CG. I said, that's not going to work. You forget, he's liquid.
that's true.
Mauricio, let's go to you. As I said at the very beginning, and it's a line from Steve, it's a magical time, and it is. And explain why it is and what we need to do to continue to make it a magical time.
A quick background on how I got obsessed with this stuff. If you guys are 90s kids, we grew up in a time when they had VHS cassettes, 101, really ugly looking covers and just, but it was like the best cartoons. It had Looney Tunes, Popeye, Betty Boop. The one I remember specifically is Betty Boop and Grampy, Cobweb Hotel, the Superman ones, obviously Popeye, Alibaba, and all that. So that I already grew up with that. And then as I was older, realized everybody else also watched this stuff, obsessively when they were a kid. And, I'm very grateful for my parents for passing that down. And I've always had that, that love for the cartoons in my head, start off with Warner Brothers and all that. I got the license for Betty Boop, I think in 2017 for my mom. I love my mom. She loves, Betty Boop, always had it. And then once I started licensing her, yeah, Betty Boop, let's do merch for her, whatever. But then I started realizing, wait a minute, there's a new interest for Coco? Like, what's this about? Apparently, there's a rapper named Ghostmane who has a cool track, and a fan of his just made this little music video, the sequence of Snow White with Coco dancing and as Keb Calloway and all that stuff. The video, I think right now has like 400 million plus views just for this little second clip, this little 40-second clip. And I saw that and I was like, one, who the hell is this clown? Why are all these kids getting tattoos of him? And like, what's the background? And then, because I had the license, I was like, wait, Coco's part of that whole world. Let me ask what's going on. Nobody was really making merch of him. I asked them, hey, could I kind of exploit this a little bit? Could I make merch of the Snow White stuff? As you can see, this is my biggest seller because of the whole Ghostmane thing.
Oh, let's not forget these pins. And
but-
there's only some of them.
But essentially, when I saw those Coco cartoons, I was just like, where are they? And what happened is with Max, when he started off doing the Coco cartoons before Paramount, that was all kind of independent stuff. So all those films were just scattered throughout the world. So
there's no masters for them.
Yeah,
All
so
that's left is old prints.
So what Jane and I are doing is we're reaching out to different archives. We're asking them, hey, could we scan this? Could we borrow this? Anything Fleischer related. But what I want to show you guys real quick is that video of Ghostmane. And in the video, I'm also showing off an AR filter that we just put out. I was talking to Jane's son Skylar about how many hits it has. I think it has like 500 million hits on my AR filter that I just did randomly. I'm gonna go play that video real quick just so you can see what this new generation, how they've just like caught Coco and are just running with it. And when I saw that, I was like, we gotta exploit this. We gotta give people Coco, let's get the cartoons, and then that kind of led to all the other beautiful cartoons. But I'm gonna run real quick, I'll play you that video so you can check it out.
Ray, real quick, while Mauricio is setting that up for us, I get the people who grew up with that being nostalgic for seeing it, but what is the explanation for a group of people, an age of people who didn't see it the first time or the second time around, falling in love with it? What's going on there?
Shall we translate?
What's the intrinsic value in somebody who grew up in the 90s or the 2000s to seeing this? They have no prior knowledge of it, but they want to wear a sweatshirt or a hat or a figure with Coco on it. What's going on?
Well, I think the animation renaissance that started in the 90s created a curiosity and awareness about what came before. So I think that contributes to it, and then a lot of people start rediscovering these things. But I think it seemed to go in spurts, but fortunately that's what helped it. In my particular perspective, I was of the second generation that saw these after their theatrical run, so I saw the first television exposures starting in 1955. I'm 70 years old, so I qualify. And so that's what really got me brought into this. And so, to make a long story short, as I say in my book, I've lived this stuff.
Yeah. Mauricio, we're good? All right, so watch this. Jane, I think we can all agree that's exactly what your grandfather had in mind when he started out.
Absolutely, especially the lyrics to that.
Yes. That's your grandfather singing, is it not? I'm pretty sure it is.
Nobody knew that. This is a scoop, y'all.
Ted, let's start with you on this one. The importance of preserving this, the cultural importance of keeping this alive, is what exactly?
That is such a loaded question. It's
Well, I'm loaded, so that's why I asked it.
Go for it.
well, it's important. This, as Steve has said to me before, it's important to get all these pieces of history because you need to fill in the cracks. Because, as we've said, a lot of this material has not been handled well over the years. We don't have masters on the early Cocos, like, for instance, the picture negative, which is the best, which would be the best element. And as Steve has said, at some point, someone in the future is going to want to see these cartoons and not go by somebody else's opinion or what is the common knowledge or the accepted narrative, and see these for themselves. And that's why we're doing this. We're getting them in, frankly, probably better quality than they looked when they came out, because we're doing things that a lot of photochemical and traditional film couldn't do in the past.
Technology has finally caught up with
Yeah.
all
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
We're in this sort of magic moment. I remember hearing this NPR story that was a writer had talked about how she lived in the country, and they heard an ice cream truck in the distance, and her mom grabbed all of this change and put it together and said, "We have to go because this will never happen again." And apparently it was the only time the ice cream truck had ever come up their road. But and we're sort of at that moment here right now because
Right, in film preservation.
we've had this whole thread of these things. I'd started to do film scanning and cleanup in 1988 when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And Ray was doing sets in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then stepped in and started restoring film. And then Mauricio came in, and then the Fleischers came in. All of the between Thad and I, we restored a good part of the Flip the Frog series from the camera negatives and Devin Baxter actually down here. So it's a scruffy group of people. It isn't Warner Brothers restoration services where they've hired all the big companies, but a big company wouldn't be able to do this.
Right.
It wouldn't be able to go through and say, okay, now we're going to hunt everywhere. We're going to bother the private collectors. We're going to bother the archives. We're going to find archives that weren't willing to lend things before,
Right.
and twist their arms.
It's a labor of love, though. It would have to
and
be.
it absolutely has to be.
Yeah.
Doors are opening, though. And
But then the
that's
next generation can come in and say, this is cool, we've
Yeah.
just given this X amount of views, or we're repurposing it. Copyright is an antiquated way of thinking about things.
Yeah.
Because copyright laws were designed to try to keep things available to the people. The reason for a copyright expiration is so things don't disappear. But what's happened is it's had the opposite effect, where renewals, and Congress had come in, and renewals could just happen over and over, orphaning that material.
Right,
So that
sure.
there's lots of things that will never be seen. And you'll get somebody like Mauricio or Jane that are like, because a lot of this stuff is public domain.
Yeah.
And the giant companies are, as much as I like them and working with them, the giant companies look at something that's public domain and they say, we shouldn't put that out because someone will just steal it. It's public domain. So now we're left with all the public domain Betty Boops not being seen in their master material because of that.
Yeah.
So that will change if there's public demand.
Right. Right.
And so I see all of these things as being a way to get this stuff back out there.
Ray, I could be wrong, but I have the feeling you have some thoughts on that.
I'm going to pick up on where Steve was going, because bringing this back to your central question about the cultural importance and so on, the fact that these things have fallen into the public domain also obscures the origin, because there are all sorts of clips floating around without reference to where they came from. And if I remember correctly from what Mauricio first told me, there was no understanding about where that Cab Calloway rotoscope footage came from. And so there's a distortion about the source. So this is another reason why the historical importance of this is paramount of interest here, simply because as long as these things are used arbitrarily without referencing the source, it's a distortion of the history and a discredit to the people who labored over these things. And doing animation is probably one of the hardest jobs that you can do in the world. And to dismiss these people is a total disservice.
But if they're seen, we'll get there.
I want to give real quick just an idea as to why I got these people involved. Ray is like the historian of all things Fleischer. He knows the ins and outs and all that. Brandon has been a really cool partner to me. We both, started off figuring this stuff out. How can we get this stuff done? And real quick, I want to highlight Thad. A really cool thing with Thad is he also knows everything about these cartoons. And I want to give you an example. I'm going to play it real quick, and maybe Thad, you can explain a bit about it. There's some films that Coco, that Max did of Coco for Paramount called the Inkwell Imps. They're basically the same Coco cartoons. So Paramount gave us the original camera negatives. They scanned them, and they gave it to us, and I gave it to Thad, and I was like, all right, Thad, here you go. Just, scan it. And then he realized, or work on it. He realized that there was a scene missing. I would have never have caught this, this mistake unless it was somebody like Thad was working with us. I'm going to go play that so you can see what exactly Thad was looking at. So Thad, as I'm playing it, feel free to discuss about it. But this is why it's important for me to have this team with us so we can save the cartoons accurately. If there's a scene missing, these guys will know. If there's audio off, if something's wrong with the visual, these guys know the ins and outs. So
This is why you need someone like Thad that loves this stuff. Master doesn't necessarily mean complete.
Then, Steve, you agree with me. It is, labor of love doesn't even begin to sell it, right?
No.
The hours that must go into this are just staggering.
Labor of mental health.
All right. Yeah, it's a long, hard process. Okay, here's the video.
Yeah.
We're like begging the guy on the phone to get the other footage.
Yeah, it was a long shot.
There's people that had no idea we'd be looking at him 100 years later.
For sure.
What is that, 2 seconds?
It was like
Yeah, that's where we're
6.
standing right now.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. I left. I gave him the gag too. So. It's all right.
Anyway, you got the 35.
There we go. Now that I just included that for your enjoyment, but where you saw that black slug, they usually would cut that out, unfortunately, pretty carelessly for stock footage. So something like that might have gotten inserted in some unrelated production, even though they cut out a shot of Coco right in the camera negative. So this.
What would happen pretty frequently is there weren't the process for making a film after the 20s was that you would make a camera negative and then you make a work print and you would edit the work print and then carefully edit the negative and then you wouldn't touch that negative. Instead, you would make what's called a fine grain from that, which was a master positive on very dense stock, so you have a beautiful copy. Then you would take that and make a dupe negative off of that and then make your prints from there. In the 20s, a lot of the time, they were taking the camera negative and running their prints off. And so they got beat up as it went, and places like Consolidated Film Service or other places would say, oops, it broke.
No.
Let's just put a little piece of black film in here to replace the frames that broke. So
Steve, is the process the exact same with animation as opposed to live action? Is the process of restoring exactly the same or not? Yeah, it is.
Thad's been working on a lot of Laurel and Hardy's and worked on a lot of the Our Gang shorts,
Yeah.
cleaning them up, and he was finding a lot of the same problems.
It's the same thing. It's every film is its own horror story, and we're not kidding when we say we have to look at this frame by frame, and that's especially true for animation. It is a frame by frame art form in its purest form.
We expect things to look better now because
Yes.
there's such beautiful material on things. So we're used to accept a pretty nice 16. Now there's high definition and higher than that, and you want to try to make these look as good as you can, while still, and I think this is important, while still preserving the original look of the film. We don't want to create something new, as Disney's has with
Yes.
with some of the feature films where they've rotoed the characters out and made the background stills.
Right.
I mean, that's okay for a new audience, I think, but we're not preserving history
Okay for
in that way.
anybody.
One thing
their
I want
films.
to add to what you said about live action and animation, at least in my limited experience, is that it seems to be easier with the programs we use to clean or repair whatever live action versus animation. I don't know if has to do with difficulty differentiating foreground from background. Also, the way, with live action, every frame there's movement. With animation, it might be a frame and then it repeats and then it jumps up here to create the perception of quickness. The way a lot of these programs work is they look at the frame ahead, frames behind, and then they try to determine scratch, dirt, or motion. But when you have, an arm that goes here and then here, it makes the assumption that that's not part of it, and then it'll chop off the fingers or the ears or whatever the case.
That's where we spend most of our time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is putting things back that the restoration program took out.
Putting back Coco's exclamation points, yes.
Yeah, or you'll have somebody get hit on the head and there's stars flashing black, white, black, white.
Or they get
and
surprised and they have the little lines.
Yeah, and those lines
Yeah,
would be
those
gone
lines,
entirely.
Yes.
Yeah. And so this used to be called digital noise reduction, DNR. Now it's really just what every restoration program does, and we've all been through the personal hell of
I'm
trying
sure.
to put things back.
Mauricio, this question goes to you. From time to time, footage is found. It's like the excavation of dinosaur bones somewhere in the world. You find new footage. Where are you finding this new footage, and how is it possible? I mean, it's a miracle that you're finding it, but you are. How are you doing this?
So, when they would send out the Coco films, specifically I'm talking about the Out of the Inkwell stuff,
Yeah.
a lot of the theaters or, business owners would keep the stuff because they weren't owned by Paramount. So what they ended up doing is, just handing them off to archives or libraries or whatever. We found a really amazing Coco the Clown cartoon called The Runaway. Basically, Coco goes to hell. And we found that at a Southern Methodist university. So like really hardcore, all religious and stuff. And they have footage of Coco with the devil and hanging out.
They were trying to hide it from the public.
Yes.
Hopefully the
Were they
State Department-
trying to hide it from the public?
No,
because
I'm kidding.
Oh, I'm hoping you could. I'm so glad. I'm so glad.
We even found some really awesome, like insanely amazing quality, like negatives and positives.
Yes.
But I hope the State Department isn't here, but they're in Russia. So we got to figure out how to maybe get those out.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're finding, what's really awesome is the fact that I have Jane. Jane has been my partner in this since the beginning. She totally fucking gets it. She sees that this stuff is amazing, and she's also been trying to get this stuff out there. So working with her has just opened up so many doors that I honestly don't think we would be at this point if it
Yeah.
wasn't for her. And one of the most amazing things that we managed to get, which I'm super thrilled to share with you guys, we have audio interviews with Max and Dave Fleischer. Apparently in Expo 67, like in France, they were trying to do, or Canada, they were trying to do a
Montreal. No.
Montreal. They were trying to do a reunion of of animation guys, and they were going to do a documentary. That went away, and then they just threw away all the stuff. But thankfully, because we've been asking for Coco stuff, they were like, "Hey, we have these interviews. Do you want them?" Fuck yeah, we do. Because what's funny is it's so weird. We've been so involved in this and learning everything about the studio, but we've never heard their voices. We've never heard Dave. We've never heard Max. So I'm gonna run over there again, and I'm gonna play you guys audio of Dave Fleischer, the director of all the Fleischer cartoons, the brother, the guy who was Coco the Clown, dressed up as Coco, and they rotoscoped him. So this is gonna be a real treat. I'm really excited and listen to his accent. It's so crazy to hear his accent, his New York. Fleischer accent, but I'm going to go ahead and play that.
Jane, while Mauricio's setting that up, have you heard this audio previously or
I've
not?
only heard a little bit of it.
What'd you make of it? What'd you think?
They definitely have New York accents.
I love the fact there's so many rediscoveries right now. It's,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's a magical little period.
What's
Gotta
in-
take advantage of it.
What's interesting, considering their background, where they came from, Max sort of sounds like a lower registered Groucho Marx.
Oh, really? Yeah?
Okay, here we go.
I'll do some things you wouldn't expect. Can I move to here?
Yeah.
Can I move around?
Yes, you can. So you want to explain what I talked to you about a little bit? How
Yes.
did you become around the
That's
year
the set of
30
Mr. Bond.
more? You must have been searching for more
Well,
sexy.
yes, and I see. Can I move around here?
Yes.
So you see over here, right here is Betty Boop. Now the reason I got my hand up here, I don't want you to know my age, see? But anyway, it was around 32 when we started this Betty Boop. But Betty Boop originally was a little dog. It was a little dog, and it was an incidental character with Coco the Clown. But everybody the public began to like this little dog and it was a female dog. And we got a lot of publicity and people were talking about it, so we kept straightening her out, and gradually we got nice legs on her, then we made a nice face, and then we gave it a song of boop boop-a-doop, boop boop-a-doop, see? And she used to sing that song. Then it became tremendously popular. And then we improved on the animation as we went along, and then it got better and better, and it ran for many, many years.
It's really the success of this little Betty Boop that made you think you were on the right.
Well,
place.
yes, from that time on, we went from that to Popeye the Sailor, and Betty and the Superman. We made all those pictures from then right on. See, and it went for years and years, and they're still running now on television. And these here are all incidental characters. See, these every once in a while you'll find that the public likes a particular thing, so we followed that up. See, when they'd write in and they write stories. We had a few letters where people would say, when you make Popeye, the mothers would send me, don't let him eat the can because my child has cut their mouths open, see. We had some cases where some children thought they'd be Superman and they'd jump out of the window and get killed. So we had, after that, we had to make Superman jump from the ground. So we didn't jump him out of windows on anymore because there were about 3 or 4 children jumped out of windows. It was really bad. And then from then on we kept, then I invented the Bluto character, the big strong guy had to have a villain, and the spinach. And as soon as the audience would feel that he's got to help himself, he'd pull up his big muscle, and then we'd have a little gag on the muscle. There'd be a big hammer go in there, and that's the way we continued the whole series.
That's marvelous. Thank you. Stay there.
So, Jane, we learned that it was an era of children whose mouths were cut open or were jumping out of windows. How about that?
Statute of limitations is passed.
Yeah,
so
we're okay now.
we're safe.
Well, that was amazing to hear. It really was amazing to hear. And there was an image in there that was haunting of, I believe, your grandfather with a giant Popeye and olive oil, and I couldn't tell if there were people in there or if those were carved or what those were. Could you tell?
That wasn't Max. That was
Oh, was that
Dave.
Max?
That was it.
Not Max?
Yeah.
Those were all Dave.
Oh, were they Dave? Every one of those were Dave?
Yeah, there were, I think, for promotional for the film.
Yeah.
Paramount put a lot of money into that film. So, yeah, there's like these big.
Popeye and olive oil
Popeye
figures.
and Gulliver.
Oh,
was the other
Gulliver.
guy.
Oh, it was Gulliver?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. And that
okay.
was in front of the Melrose Paramount, I believe, in California.
So what year are we talking?
When did
39.
That was
39.
39.
1939.
When he was
40.
out there doing post.
Amazing, amazing. Steve, let's talk a little bit about Betty Boop and the lost cartoons of Betty Boop.
Oh.
And as some of us just found out, she started out as a dog, didn't she?
Yeah. The Boops are interesting because there's a handful of them that never made it into what was called the UM&M TV package. So in the early 50s, there was a great demand to try to get as much product onto television as possible. And so a lot of movie companies started selling their old product to television. And they wanted to have any reference to the studios removed from that product so that they're sort of in a non-competition sort of way. But there also seemed to be some want to try to disassociate from television, to have theatrical films be one thing and cartoons another. So they would try to take any references out of those films, including lobbing off the main titles. And if there was a reference in the film, one reference in Porky and Wacky Land was famously missing for a lot of years. But anyway, some of the boops ended up not, for whatever reason, not in that TV package. Either the negative wasn't in the right place, or in one case, the soundtrack was missing.
Yeah.
So I think there are 4. Is that right?
That's right.
4 boops that were essentially lost for many years. And the interest of quite a few cartoon researchers, including David Gerstein is the one who found this one here, and Tommy Stath is going and looking for some of this stuff as well. But we managed to unearth one called Honest, Love, and True, which there was a silent print of it, and then a sound print surfaced in a European archive.
Yeah.
And so we scanned it, and it exists again.
And it's in your new set, right, Betty Boop?
Yeah, it's in. We did a little Betty Boop set of-
Thunderbeanshop.com?
Pardon?
Thunderbeanshop.com to get that Blu-ray set with that lost
You're
cartoon?
promoting me. Thank you.
Thanks, Mauricio. That was
we
nice.
sell a Blu-ray of Betty Boops that
excellent.
include that lost one. But another one showed up in Russia as well.
Really?
That UCLA restored more recently, and
How do you even how can that be accounted for? What was happening that it went to Russia?
people knew it was there.
Yeah.
Well, no, how did it end up there? But before the war, before World War II, American film was everywhere. It was
Yeah.
the popular film around the world. In fact, if you look at animation from other countries, they're often emulating like the Van Buren cartoons. Or there's a great Egyptian, like the first Egyptian cartoon is called Enjoy Your Food. And it has characters that look like Van Buren cartoon characters, which I think is hilarious.
Yeah.
Actually traced whole scenes out of American cartoons because they didn't know how to animate yet.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about that is what they were trying to emulate was several years behind what was already current in America. They were like 7 to 10 years
Yeah.
behind the techniques.
So it's weird. Like there's a huge transition between 1933 and 1936 in terms of the quality of cartoons. Not only does the production code fall into place, kind of making Betty Boop way less interesting.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
but technique improved greatly. Disney's developing personality. Really, every studio developing personality animation.
They're doing Popeye at the time, which was the best series, period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Popeye hits a peak somewhere around 36, 37.
That's right.
Those are the greatest.
That's right.
There's rarely a bad Fleischer Popeye. They're all, and I think the Betty Boops up until 1934 are all pretty good.
As long as he had the black shirt, that's what you want to look at.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's good. We're going to get to some questions from you, the audience, in just a second. But first, Thad, this question is for you. To put it mildly, Betty Boop was a little controversial.
Yes.
With the censoring being what it was back then, how did they get away with some of that stuff?
In the before the code, it was sort of a free-for-all, but once the code got laid down, they just, it's kind of interesting. It was the code, and I think it was a lot of, Ray would know more. It was a lot more the more daring artists who were going on to the Popeye series, wouldn't you say so?
Well, it's a combination of things, but there's something also to be considered too, because you got to look at Paramount's history.
Yeah.
And among other things, a lot of people don't realize, but they went through 4 bankruptcy reorganizations. And part of that was due to the fact that they were losing money about having to recall prints of Mae West films and so forth, even though Mae West saved them from bankruptcy many times. But the expense of issuing prints and having to recall them or not being able to play them in certain parts of the country because of prudish social attitudes and so forth, that by the time Barney Balaban came in 1936, which is the turning point of the entire company, he changed the content of the films to make them more general audience. And that's the major influence for change the content of all of Paramount's films. And also understand this too, Fleischer Studios was a service company to Paramount. That was the Achilles heel in that relationship. So if at a certain point, if they were not performing to Paramount's expectations, they would not have to renew the contract.
Amazing.
The giant thing that Disney learned was that they needed to own their own films, but moreover, they needed to own their own characters.
Correct.
After Oswald was taken away from
Correct.
Disney, because Oswald was always a Universal character.
Yeah.
Characters created by Universal, and so Disney's were work for hire.
Yeah.
And the odd thing is that Fleischer's best character was a licensed character.
Yeah.
The same thing in Superman. Superman was a licensed character. So Fleischer Studios, those were the two major assets that Fleischer Studio had that kept Paramount wanting to stay in business with them.
I'm guessing that some of you have a question or two for our STEAM panel. So if you do, there's a microphone set up right over here. There's a microphone set up right over there. We would love to have you ask some questions. There's a bunch. Let's start out with you. What's your name, sir?
Ben.
Hi, Ben. How are you?
I'm good.
Who's your question for?
One is, I guess, a bit for the entire group, and it's like a two-parter. One is like, have you guys seen the Cuphead video game and it's like anime stuff? Like, because that's like been the biggest loving homage to the Fleischer era I've seen in the entire 2 decades. It's like how much it's managed to translate all that to a even more interactive format, and what do you think that means for why audiences have taken to it in game format? And I guess the second is, since the Superman cartoon basically was like a template for the genre's adaptation purposes, including Batman the Animated Series, which like redefined interest in those things for the 90s, how would you say like the power of animation is like almost like tapped into the superhero genre to this?
Great question, Ben. Let's start out with the Cuphead element of the question, guys. I know you've seen it.
Can I just say, I'm so frustrated that every time a kid sees a classic cartoon, they say that's Cuphead style. So that's been driving me to, it's been literally been driving me to challenge that, where I go to somebody who likes that, like, no, that's Fleischer, that's Ub Iwerks, that's this and that. So that's really, it really is a contributing factor as to why, it's lit a fire, with me to like, no, I need to teach kids that that's not Cuphead, And because of how popular that show has been in the game, that also helps me to, show Jane and the rest of the team, like, hey, we should keep doing this. There's a demand for these classic cartoons, so let's give them the best ones. Because, right now there's a lot of limited animation. They're trying to do the animation that they did back in the day. So if we have that animation ready to go, we just need to scan it and clean it up, then let's do that. Because there's literally hundreds of these films in that vault that we still need to clean up and save. So Cuphead's cool. I'm glad that it's got people into this stuff, but quite frankly, I want to beat them at their own game. I want Fleischer to be back
this is
on
what's funny,
top.
though. I think entirely opposite of that.
Yeah, I'd also just want to say that.
Oh, that's my personal. That's
the
my
rubber hose,
personal.
they'll
No,
just bounce
it's,
back.
it's a nice booster for me. I have no hate against him. I love Cuphead. I know Dave Wasson, who runs the Cuphead show, so it's all good. It's just friendly little rival.
Well, that's the TV show. I think he was referring to the original game, right? Because the point that I wanted to bring up is the fact that it's not so much that you're emulating the character design style, which is one issue. That's not the main issue about why the animation looks like Fleischer animation. It's in the timing. And very few people know how they timed those characters to get that level of animation. And that's what these people did. They studied those Fleischer cartoons to figure out how they timed the drawings. That's the key element. And that's also the difference between the game and the TV show. They're not timed the same, even though it looks like it, but it's not quite the same thing.
To your thing about Superman, the reason, like I keep saying, I'm a 90s kid, fucking love Batman, the animated series. The reason that Batman show was made and it looks the way it does is because of the Max Fleischer Superman cartoons. I think the head of the Warner Brothers animation head of, whatever, she was like, hey, I really love these Fleischer cartoons. Why don't you make the Batmans look like that? She told that to, I believe, Bruce Timm.
It's really Lynn
They
Naylor.
admitted it.
Lynn
That
Naylor
was-
got
was
Tim
their
to
inspiration.
go that direction.
Yeah,
First
so
Tim to go that.
and then plus, what's really awesome, we posted a clip of that one of the Superman Fleischer cartoons. I think right now it's at 5 million views, just this small little clip. But the clip alone just shows you how amazingly talented the Fleischers were. The beautiful backgrounds, the animation, Superman fighting this laser, going back down and up. That's the freaky thing about this. Kids have not seen this. This new generation have not seen this Superman. Quite frankly, a lot of them think Superman's lame just because of the movies and all this sort of stuff. But I think the best version of Superman are those Max Fleischer cartoons. That's the ultimate, best Superman stuff.
No
So-
question.
You know,
Just in the interest of time. Oh, Steve, go ahead.
Oh,
really
I was
quick.
just saying briefly,
Yeah.
Dave didn't want to do the series. I think that they quoted Paramount some ridiculous amount.
Yeah.
And Paramount still said yes.
I
Is that
just
right?
wanna
No,
add-
no, I'm sorry. I have to interject on that. The misunderstanding about that is based on an interview that Dave did where he had a tendency to kind of get off topic and fabricate a few things.
So is that a Dave fabricated story?
Yes, it is. That was in his 1968 interview. The actuality and how I know is because I saw the contracts.
Well, we got to fix that history.
So first of all, Max got the license for Superman. Dave didn't want to do it because it required a lot more time to draw realistically. And one story has it that they figured, well, if they quoted a certain figure, Paramount wouldn't want to do it, but Max wanted to do it. So actually, the first one was budgeted in the contract at $50,000, and each subsequent was $35,000. So that's why the opening is reprinted to save $15,000 on each cartoon. But that's what they cost, not $90,000, because in the situation they were in, Paramount was not going to pay them $90,000 to produce a 7-minute cartoon.
All right, just in the interest of time. Great question, by the way. Over to you, sir. Your name?
Bill, I do
Wait,
want to
Jane?
interject and just say
Yeah.
one thing really clear from the Fleischers,
Yeah.
that we are actually delighted and honored that Cupheads emulated the Fleischer style, which they did deliberately, and we're thrilled with their product.
Sure.
That they're out there with those cartoons.
Good.
It is just
Very good. Thanks, Jane.
amazing for us.
Your name, sir? I'm sorry. All right, go ahead. Ask your question.
So one of the things that attracted me a lot about the Fleischer cartoons is that they weren't afraid to get dark. Like, Ed Luke's a very sensible character. Coco goes to hell. One of my favorite episodes is Bimbo trying to get word into a cult.
Yeah.
Were they saying, do you want to get a member?
Of course.
So that's my favorite. But what did Max ever approach animation as like just a thing for kids, or did he have a mindset of like really everybody of all ages should enjoy animation? Because I've always been like harsh on the idea that animation is just for kids.
No. In the first place, when theatrical cartoons were being made, they were made for feature film product release, and making them for children was furthest from their minds. It had nothing to do with that. And I've been one of the proponents, like it or not, that have been telling people that was not the case. Animation was never meant for children anyway. That became more so due to two things, because of the Disney fantasy and the success of that sort of created a mindset of children's fantasy for what he was doing, but that wasn't the complete definition for what animation could be. It can be many things, as we know. The second reason why it fell into the children's ghetto is because of when the old theatricals were sold to television, and they were aired in children's programming blocks. So that's how the animation for children idea came about. But a lot of those things were definitely not aimed at children in the first place, because we know there were a lot of adult themes in a lot of those cartoons. And in some cases, some of them just were withdrawn from distribution because they were just too far over, like alcoholism and things of that nature.
All right, excellent question. Thank you so much. Over to you. Your name?
My name is Louis. Thanks for all the work you guys are doing. So I just would love, so one of the reasons why I love the Betty Boop cartoons so much is that I really feel that the aesthetics are so New York, 30s, working class Jewish. And I would really love if you guys could sort of talk a little bit about that and how that differentiates from the other animation pioneers at the time and what they were doing and how those aesthetics influenced that.
I mean, they're such ethnic cartoons, really, but the people that are making them are all young artists.
They drew what they knew.
And what was happening, if we're talking about the early 30s, when iWorks left Disney's, Hugh Harman and Rudolph Ising had left. Those were all people from Kansas City, originally, from Kansas City, Missouri. They went to California and made farmyard cartoons, really. But when they left, then Disney sent people out to New York to recruit people. And so a lot of the more experienced animators went and worked at Disney, who was the most popular studio, in 1930. And when they left this really young staff with just a few more experienced people really running things, and Grim Natwick was kind of running things early. And so there wasn't anybody to tell them to not do those gags. And I think that they all thought it funny, and there's a guttural humor, there's a sort of nightmare quality, to a lot of those films. So I think, you can look at other New York cartoons, and they have some of those same ideas. The Van Buren cartoons. Van Buren was really just down the street, so I got to know Myron Waldman a little bit, and he said that if you got fired from Fleischer's, you could get a job immediately at Van Buren, which is why the Van Buren cartoons started to get a little bit better, especially in inking. That's all I got.
Drawing too.
Yeah, and animation, everything got better and better.
Louis, thanks for your question.
Thanks, guys.
Wonderful. Your name, sir?
Hi, my name is Joe.
Hi, Joe.
I did not know until I watched the documentary, I think it was on the Superman DVD, that Superman didn't fly until Fleischer Studios asked Siegel and Schuster if we can make him fly. And my question is, how much do we owe to Fleischer Studios as far as the development of Superman as a character as we know him today?
There was a lot in developing Superman for the screen that added to the definition of the character, and that was to their betterment. As a matter of fact, there was one story where Siegel and Schuster came down there as consultants when they were discussing these things. The flying thing, the story has it, was a solution that came from a suggestion from Max. They had done some test animation before they went into full force in production. And in Arctic Giant, I think that was the only time they used that animation of Superman jumping and skipping, and it looked so silly that they said, we're not going to do that. And the solution about having Superman fly also solved an animation problem, because it makes a much better shape, because when he compresses his body into the shape of a bullet, it makes a clean line, and it looks far more dramatic.
Amazing. Great question.
Can I
Thank you so much.
One more thing
Yeah.
to that. I forget the specific film in which it's the first time he flies. What they did in the earlier films is they kind of concealed the jumping part. We just showed a clip from Mechanical Monsters, and what you see is he jumps up, and then he kind of gets slow, and then he turns down, and he goes down. So technically he's not flying, he's doing a really big leap.
It's a jump.
And going down. And for the first, I forget how many of those films, that's how he's flying, and it's later on. I don't even know if it was until after Famous took over that he...
And Brandon's the one who is working on the 2 Supermans that we got from Australia, so thank him for the really cool Superman stuff.
Excellent. Excellent.
No.
Yeah, 2 Superman, because straight
They're not
up...
lost. They're Warner Brothers, I think, owns the camera negatives, and wanting copies for ourselves for this project, we've had to seek copies out from elsewhere. We have found a couple in an Australian archive, so that's where we got them.
That's awesome.
I wish so badly I feel so bad that we don't have time for any more questions. I just want to thank you guys all for being here. It means as much to us to have you as the fans. Our esteemed panel, a magnificent job. If you get a chance, Tune In With Me is on MeTV Monday through Friday, 7 Eastern, 6 Central. We would love to have you watch the show. If you're a fan of this sort of animation, and I know you are, you'll enjoy the show. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the Comic-Con.
Thank you.
If you guys want posters, I have 2 versions of the Fleischer posters. If you guys want one, just meet us outside, and I'll gladly hook you guys up with one if you guys want one. If you guys have pens or something, maybe they could sign it too. Thank you, guys.